Good day and welcome to Interface. Today we take a frank look at the state of our nation's mental health. The symptoms are scary. Domestic murder's just one of those symptoms. Our guest today is Professor of Psychiatry, Dr. Wendel Abel, and I'm Sasha Lee Hamilton. Dr. Wendel Abel, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Before I let you jump into it, I just want to bring some context.
Sure.
On Sunday, January 12, 27-year-old Nevia Sinclair was stabbed to death by her ex-boyfriend at her home in St. Elizabeth. That killing came just hours after a JDF corporal murdered his common-law wife, 34-year-old Suan Easy in Portmore, St. Catherine, before killing himself, that is. And days before that, on New Year's Eve, 24-year-old Chantel White was murdered by her alleged lover. And just yesterday, there was another case in Manchester where 2 women were killed. And that's believed also to be another case of domestic violence, of a domestic dispute. What's causing this?
Well, I think these figures speak to the wider problem that Jamaica does have a major problem in terms of crime and violence. In fact, we're among the top 10 countries, murderous countries in the world. And there are some listings that actually put us number 4 in terms of homicide. So it really reflects a wider problem. And this year we seem to be focusing on women and partners being killed within the context of domestic or intimate partner violence. But in another year, we're focusing on children who are being killed or elderly persons who are being killed. And it's not to say that children or older persons are not being killed now, you know, but it's just the cycle of focus has shifted,
Yes.
right? And I'm not underplaying or reducing the fact that we do have a problem with domestic violence. It has always been a problem in this country, and it accounts, the intimate partner interpersonal violence, right, accounts for up to 40% of violence in this country. So that's pretty high, and it speaks to how we relate with each other. Now, you know, there are many factors that contribute to violence in this society. And we look at it from different perspectives. At the individual level, there are things operating. There are factors within the home environment, the family, yes? And how the high levels of exposure that children especially are getting within the context of the family. That part of the challenge we face, you know, is that the parental style in terms of discipline in this country, it's very harsh, bordering on abuse, yes? And so we have a lot of children who are growing up in this context where they're physically abused, and we would want to suggest, or some of us would want to say that it's really part of the whole disciplining process. You know the phrase that we sometimes use to support it is that you should spare the rod, spoil the child, yes? But the reality is that our style of disciplining is very harsh, and persons who've done research in the area, for example, Dr. Gale, he's indicated that young men who are actually exposed to high levels of harsh discipline are really at greater risk for actually becoming perpetrators of crime themselves. So the family environment, and within the family context, it's how people relate to each other in the context of intimate partners. I mean, we're going back to that. And then beyond the family, there are community factors, you know, wider social factors. The culture is a major one, right? And these things speak to what is happening in our head, you know, and our thoughts and our actions are shaped. That when you look, for example, at the popular culture, it is one that supports, glamorizes violence and the gun culture. I mean, I must commend us as a country that we've been doing a lot more to kind of reduce it. But the reality is that violence is popularized, it's glamorized within the popular culture. And it speaks to the enabling environment and our general attitude as a society. In fact, recently, I was just in traffic, stalled at a particular point, and somebody was walking, and their comment was, I just listened, and they were saying, something to the effect that I'm going to kill him, just casually. Yeah, I mean, and it's a casual, absolute, it's a casual expression we use in the society. In communities, especially rural communities, you may catch a goat thief, and what does the community do? They come out and they beat the person to death. Yes? Again, speaking of the culture of violence. So it is operating at different levels, the individual, the family, the community level. And then beyond that, of course, we know that the political culture has contributed to it. So the violence we're seeing just didn't occur overnight. I mean, in the 70s, we know the whole political dynamics at the time, the polarization, the formation of groups, and increase in crime, especially in 1980, when the crime rate actually peaked over a particular period of time. And with that, political culture, I think, has also developed the whole concept of garrisons. Many garrisons, as you know, in this community, in this country, and garrisons which are aligned to political parties, again, in which there's high levels of poverty, high levels of political polarization, high levels of criminal activity, supported by the political culture, yes? And we've moved a far way, we've come a far way, because several years ago we had the problems, the challenge with the politicians attending the funerals of dons and that sort of thing, and aligning themselves with gangs and so on. Not to say it doesn't exist today, but it obviously has been reduced significantly.
So you believe that violence in general is desensitizing people, and then, in essence, affecting how people relate to each other, and causing domestic violence?
Absolutely. And then the institutions, I think, have also failed us. Institutions like the school, yes? School is an area of socialization, right? And we do have problems and challenges in terms of the violence within schools. But I think also the educational system has to take a second look in terms of how we develop our curriculum. And our curriculum is too focused on having children pass the PEP exam or getting a few subjects at the CSEC level, right? And when you compare our curriculum with that of other countries, you realize in many other countries, their curriculum is heavily infused with what we call life skills training, yes? And we need to focus more on this. In other words, an important part of the educational system is to prepare a citizen, a human being, that animal who is going to be able to live and work in this society, and who's able to control his impulse, who is going to display pro-social and appropriate behavior, right? But somehow, I think the education system has failed us in this regards, right? In fact, there was a time, you know, when an important subject that was taught in school was called civics. Civics for Young Jamaican, where you really were taught how to become a citizen, a responsible member of the community, how to conduct yourself, how to relate to each other, and that sort of thing. And so we've moved away from that. And so part of my discourse today is really extending a call to the education system that we need to relook our curriculum. But other institutions, the faith-based groups, churches, with a country with so many churches, you're actually surprised, actually appalled that we have this level of crime and violence. And obviously the church has failed us, right? And a lot of the dysfunctional behavior that we see in society, unfortunately, also exists within the church. And that's part of the reality. You look at churches, for example, and I know we're talking about crime and violence, but it all adds up. I mean, how we condone, how we support behaviors that are unlawful. You have churches that are being built on land that is squatted. Yes? You have churches being built and they breach the regulations. They put a church here and there's no proper parking, so the church members have to park on the road, right? I mean, these really speak to a breakdown in terms of discipline, order in a society, and if you can't maintain the fundamentals, like basic discipline and basic order, then it escalates, and this is a challenge we face. Yeah? Another institution would be your criminal justice system, big one. I'm not an expert here. But in terms of, I must commend governments over time who've really been making great efforts towards criminal justice reform. And it has to do with, for example, cases are brought before the court, how quickly they are disposed of, because it sends a signal to criminals that, look, I mean, there's a high possibility that we're going to get away. And there are many problems, I mean, that contribute to this sort of thing in terms of how cases are handled by the police, how cases are dealt with within the court system. So we have to accelerate the pace of our criminal justice reform. And the other issue is your police. Policing is a big one, yes? That there was a time when the focus in terms of policing was really on I don't want to, I mean, as persons would probably put it, is really brutalizing the young men in inner city and incarcerating them, and which really, I mean, really was associated with high levels of abuse. But I mean, one must note that there's been obviously a shift in how policing is done in this country. And again, it's about our human behavior and how we interact and, relate with each other, because these reinforce the inappropriate behaviors and relationship between police and citizens, because we need our police. They do a wonderful job. They're hardworking. But we must note and we must commend, but we must call for a strengthening of that, the policing system that they're implementing, where it's really more based on intelligence, which has to do with gathering information and using that information to solve and problem solve in terms of your crime activities. And then, of course, another level that we have to look at is really the policy and the legislative framework, and how the policy environment facilitate a lot of these things.
Dr. Abel, I'm going to ask you to hold that thought. We're going to a break right now, so stay with us on Nterface. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Nterface. Our guest is Professor of Psychiatry, Dr. Wendel Abel. I'm Sasha Lee Hamilton. Dr. Abel, you were speaking about policing a while ago, so I'm going to allow you to finish your thought.
No, I think I pretty much had, kind of completed that, yes.
I want to ask, if anybody, who benefits from this?
I'm inclined to say nobody, but I probably may quickly withdraw that and say probably only the undertaker. Yes, and it's sad to say when we see the number of persons who are killed in this country on a yearly basis. And I have a great concern for youth, young people, because, young men, especially those who fail to complete education and have become unattached and marginalized in the society, are not only at risk, in terms of dying, but they themselves are also perpetrators of crime and violence, and we have to pay attention to this group and how we can intervene, and I hope we can come back to that.
Yes.
But to answer your question in terms of who benefit, nobody does. But as we know, the crime and violence in the society places a tremendous toll on our resources. It costs more at all levels. I mean, business level, at the individual level, at the home level, people have to put in a lot of security system in place, and many people become victims and either physically wounded or psychologically scarred or die, right? Nobody benefits. At the community level, it's the same thing. That the crime and violence really impacts on our economic growth and development to a tremendous extent. This country could be far ahead economically had it not been for the crime in this country. And if, you know, sometimes I think about it, and you know, I pass through many inner city communities, and you see the deterioration, the decay, the poverty, and you say to yourself, if we only could convince a lot of the community members, especially the young people, that if they were to put down their guns, that their communities could actually be transformed. I mean, recently, we see where, for example, the cruise ship that came in, yes? And we have to make the connections that persons actually opted to go to Trenchtown, yes? To Culture Yard, to visit, yes? And can you imagine if communities like those were violent-free? A community like Trenchtown, that people would be pouring in. It would certainly enhance tourism in the area and create opportunities. And so if the people on the ground could just see the connection and how they could benefit. And somehow we have to be able to, make greater attempt to creep into their headspace and to make these connections and to help them. And you know, all is not lost, because as I think about it, I remember several years ago, we had a program in the Grand Spend area. It was a program, very successful crime prevention program, because at the time, maybe about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, an area like Grand Spend had a major problem with crime and violence. And this was a USAID funded program. It was costly, but it was effective. And why is it that program was effective? Because the approach they used was multi-pronged. They focused on developing infrastructure in the community, yes, at one level. So a police station was put in, the health center was upgraded, library was upgraded. They worked with various organizations, community-based organization, social development commission, church. In fact, several of the churches were critical in terms of the rollout of the program. There were also behavior modification program, and a lot of emphasis was actually placed on that, where we actually developed a whole behavior modification program targeting especially young people who were showing antisocial behavior. And this was actually, we used a novel approach where we integrated it in sports. Right, so through the church they mounted massive community-wide sporting development and competition, and an important part of that whole process was the behavior modification program, and that targeted especially your unattached youth, a lot of young people who were marginalized, many of whom had dropped out of school and so on. And simple things were done, you know. For example, before the start of a competition, you'd ensure that the national anthem is played, persons were reminded to stand up appropriately, hands to your side, and that sort of thing. We taught them conflict resolution skills, so if that you had a problem on the football field, for example, it did not result in violence and escalate into wider gang violence. And these things work, they gain traction. Another important part of the whole process was we identified young people, persons in the community who were at risk, and they were actually taught skills, yes, life skills, and a lot of them were also sent for vocational training. That was a very important part, because we know that, and we see it in many inner city communities and poor communities, that economic deprivation is a contributor. In fact, it's often said that Poverty itself doesn't lead to crime. It's not so much poverty. It's what you have to distinguish between absolute poverty and relative poverty. Absolute poverty, everybody in the community is living poor. They don't have any chickens, for example, or everybody would probably has one chicken, and people will not steal. But it's when you have relative poverty where the income gap, the disparity is great. So if I have no chicken and you have 10, I probably might be inclined to jump your fence to steal one. So it's relative poverty that is a major factor. And so going back to these communities where some of these were at play, the relative poverty, we recognize that it was important to actually pull people out of poverty, have them trained so they could enter the job market, because far too many of our young people are either unemployed or unemployable. I mean, at least good to say that we're in a Jamaica today where at least the unemployment level is actually being reduced. But then in terms of the grant spend, 15 years ago, that was a major program. But what was interesting to us is that lots of the persons who were being trained, receiving vocational training, just were not adequately equipped with the life skills. So you'd have, in fact, I remember there was a situation where set of young ladies were being trained in catering, and a fight broke out in the kitchen, and one of them went to the oven and took the unbaked cake and threw it at the other one, right? Violence, interpersonal violence. And so it was important for us to integrate in these programs conflict resolution skills, life skill training, and I keep going back to that. It's that in many communities, children are growing up in families and in the community without the adequate life skills that will prepare them to survive in today's world, right? And it then now takes us to what then do I see in terms of some of the intervention program. And one of the things we must appreciate with crime and violence
Before
is
you
that
before you get to intervention, though, you talked about this program in Grand Spend. That was 15 years ago.
Yes.
And you say it was successful.
Yes.
You have figures to prove it.
Well, I mean,
all the graduates, all the people who participated, they have come out on the other side?
The majority of them are actually placed in jobs, like cruise ships, hotel work, and that sort of thing. So I didn't take the data with me today. But just when you look at the wider community today, you see that the crime rate has decreased significantly in Grand Spend, and that the community has settled down significantly. It has come a long way.
Yes, and you also mentioned that you got help from the USAID.
It was a heavily funded USAID program, actually through the Kingston Restoration, KRC, yes? I mean, I was only brought in to help with the behavior modifications. I don't want to take credit for KRC program, which was funded through USAID.
And then through this program, it brings to light now, well, this issue. Is it still relevant to say a village is necessary to raise a child?
Absolutely. It takes a village to raise a child. And it starts within the family. And within the family, it starts very early. In fact, we talk about the first 1,000 days, which is from conception, when the lady gets pregnant, to the end of age 2. Very important in the development of the child, In fact, even at the University of the West Indies, studies have been done. One famous study and intervention was by a former professor at the university. She's still alive, Sally McGregor. And what her study showed is that, and this was looking at children who were undernourished, that simple intervention, like providing nutritional support, home visitation by our community health aides, who would provide stimulation and provide some basic parenting training, had a significant impact on those who received these. That they in fact, that these persons who received the early intervention were more successful in life generally. They were more likely to complete high school, and they were less likely to be involved in criminal activity. And so the point, although this was among undernourished children, this study and other studies have shown that early intervention, especially in the first 1,000 days, is very important. In fact, when a child gets a good start, it guarantees success. In fact, when I think about this, I always remember some of our athletes. I won't call name, but there's one particular athlete we know when she gets a good start, you know she's going to succeed. And the point is, when a child gets a good start, success.
Yes. And on that note, we're going to take another break on Nterface. Stay with us. Welcome back to Nterface. Our guest is Professor of Psychiatry, Dr. Wendel Abel, and I'm Sasha Lee Hamilton. Dr. Abel, we're going into the intervention now. What do we do to stem this? But before you say what do we do to stem this, I remember you said in the first half that there are factors that we see in the home. So I want you to tell me now, break it down for me. What factors are there that we see in the home?
Well, all right, in many communities, for example, first of all, the wider community, because a home exists within a wider community, you have a lot of persons, children who are being socialized in these large tenement yards and exposed to different value systems. And unfortunately, if you go into many of these communities, they're wandering the streets at night, exposed to gambling and, inappropriate behavior and that sort of thing. So a lot of it has to do with how we socialize our children within the family and within the community. So parenting is an important part, right? And we have to emphasize, we have to put more resources in terms of parenting children, parenting training. Because we must remember, that still we have far too many young people who themselves didn't develop adequate life skills and were not adequately prepared to be parents, are themselves having children, right? And a lot of these children fall through the cracks. So we have to place a lot of emphasis on parenting training and life skills within the home. And then it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the early intervention within the home environment, where parents have to be more nurturing, provide more stimulation for the children and so on. These things may seem trivial, but they're important, yes? Because lots of children who grow up in a more caring, loving, nurturing environment, yes? A more stimulating environment, do better educationally and also in life. And it's, for example, I'll give you a basic example. In a economically deprived home, a poor home, you may have a child with toys. And the child is playing with the toys. Parents don't interact with the child and will shout at the child to put away the toys. Whereas in another home where it's more stimulating, parents will actually spend time with that child, interact with them with the toys, teach them about the toys and that sort of thing. And so those children actually grow up with a higher level of stimulation and do better, and they acquire better life skills, how to relate to family members and communicate and that sort of thing. So these are important. How we communicate within the environment is also a very important one. And if you give me some time, I'll highlight something to us. I think our communication style lends itself to a great extent to interpersonal aggression and sometimes conflict. So for example, we use a lot of you message in our communication. So if I walk in here late, you probably say, and I know you wouldn't, say, but you're late again. I have been sitting here waiting for you. It's a you message. And what you messages do is put down people, If you look at how we interact with each other, it's a lot of you messages. Within the context of a domestic situation, interpersonal violence, the partner goes to the other one and say, you're cheating on me, you you're not paying me enough attention. You have another person outside. It's you message.
Yeah.
And the you message is attack. Whereas the better way to communicate is to use what we call iMessage. So you could say to me when I walk in, it is, you know, I'm very disappointed that we're going to start late. I would have preferred if you had called so that I could make adequate provision. That's an iMessage technique. And it doesn't come across as being attacking, aggressive. Yes?
Yes.
Within the context of a home situation, the female partner could say, I'm deeply concerned because I notice not much attention is coming my way. And I would really like for us to sit and have a little discussion in terms of what is happening to our relationship, rather than the you message where we're attacking each other. I think that communication pattern is a major factor that contributes to the interpersonal aggression and the conflict. But it's a part of the whole life skill. Yeah, we take these things for granted, but again, when you're looking, for example, children in a North American school, these things are actually taught to them from an early age. It's a life skill training, right? So we have to re-socialize our people, yes, from an early age.
What should we look for in a partner?
And so you're coming back to the partner and the interpersonal violence.
Yes.
That's a big topic.
Yes.
But
Are there signs?
Perpetrator more often is a male. In terms of domestic violence, intimate partner violence. I'm not saying that men are not victims themselves. A lot of times, the whole psychological makeup of the whole and the dynamics of the relationship, a lot of time, it's a woman who probably is more educated possibly, or in a better job, and more economically stable than the male partner. And then he becomes emasculated, psychologically reduced in the relationship, yes? And then that sets up what we call a cycle of control, where he tries to control the woman. And in controlling her, not only control her, but also isolates her. So he'll tell her that, I don't like your family members. Your sister chat too much. I don't like that friend. She spent too much time chatting and gossiping. Yes? And so the woman or the partner is actually isolated from family and friends. And the control builds up. And also, she's also psychologically undermining the relationship. You're always going out with your rich friends, but you're not beautiful after all, right? And so he'll criticize her and undermine her and devalue her psychologically. And also she's always blamed in the relationship for things that go wrong. And so what you have is a partner who is devalued, criticized, diminished in the relationship. Control, isolated from family, friends, and control.
But even before the relationship, what should a female then? We're saying female because in most
what
cases
should they look for?
Male. Yes.
Sometimes these things are not evident during the courting period, you know. Yes, because the male may come across very loving, charming, caring, the ideal sort of person one would want for a partner.
So there are no signs.
Sometimes there's subtle signs, especially when you see the subtle criticism creeping in and attempts to control. Yes? These may be signs, and these are things that must be addressed. The person not telling you enough about his friends and his family and that sort of thing, or attempting to criticize your family members and to isolate you. These are some of the signs. But once you get into that relationship, they escalate. Because sometimes when we enter a relationship, we always hope that we're going to change the person. And that is rarely ever possible. We can't change other human beings. We can't change ourselves. I often tell people that things will not change until you change, right? Don't expect. It's hard for you to change somebody. You can change yourself. But
should we do background checks?
But how is that going to be possible, you know? And lots of times that may not be practical, right? But of course, if you meet somebody and you're going to court them, you want to get to know some more about them, and you do so by interacting with their family and friends and that sort of thing. And you may actually you may actually find out that this person actually has been in previous relationship in which they abused. They were an abuser, yes? And that would be a big red flag.
Yes.
But sometimes when people fall in love, they don't want to hear these things, you know, right? And it's probably blamed on their past partner. So women have to look out for these things. Partners have to look out for these things. But it's once you see that cycle of control, the cycle of, well, it's isolation first, the control, the attempts to undermine and criticize, setting in, it really is a big red flag. And that's the time that you must really consider whether you're going to remain in the relationship. But then, you know, after every cycle of abuse, what happens, there's, I mean, attempts to make up and love making and that sort of thing. And then the vicious cycle continues over and over and over. And it gets to a point where women become trapped in these relationships.
Yes.
They want to leave, or they have made attempts to leave, but they end up finding themselves getting back in the relationship, or it's just very difficult to leave because you genuinely fear for your life.
Yes.
Yes? And this is where the challenge, a lot of women who are in these situations will tell you that sometimes they don't get the support of the police as they should, you know, and sometimes your very family and community members initially may blame you because they see this man as somebody who is a good person, going to church, you know, or good member of the community, hardworking, charming, that sort of thing, endearing to others outside. So it must be the woman that she's actually blamed, yes? That must be something about her. So you don't get the support sometimes of family, friends, and then when the matter is reported to the police, they're not well equipped to deal with it. And on a wider society level, domestic violence is probably not dealt with adequately in the broader society, that sometimes women have to go in hiding.
Yes.
We're a small country, sometimes it's difficult. Over the years I've found, for example, in terms of counseling and therapy, some of the women who have been more successful at getting out of these relationships are women who have a visa.
Yes.
And thank God for that visa, they can actually sneak out of the country, yes?
Yes.
But there are other things that will keep them trapped in these relationships, you know. One, the shame of losing a partner and marriage failing, how the wider society is going to perceive you. Children, that's a big one.
Yes.
How are my children?
I'm going to ask you to pause right there because we have another break. So stay with us on Nterface. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Nterface. Our guest is Professor of Psychiatry, Dr. Wendel Abel. I'm Sasha Lee Hamilton. Dr. Abel, we've been speaking a lot about this mental issue, whatever this is that is causing this domestic, well, violence in general, but we want to zoom in on the domestic aspect of it. So how do we resolve it? What do we do? You mentioned education, civics being taught in schools. What do you suggest?
You know, Sasha Lee, I wish I could provide an easy answer, but as I said earlier, the problem is a complex one, and the solutions certainly are not simple solutions, and a lot of them are long-term. They're not going to be overnight, because unfortunately we have lost several generations in this country, and it may be very difficult, maybe 1 or 2 generations, and it may be very difficult for us to re-socialize them. But we have to start within the home. But as I say, we need to relook at our school curriculum and the life skill component And I think although they're taught, I don't think they're really taught properly, because a lot of times the people who teach them are persons who don't have the skills themselves, yes? But the education system really has a major role to play. I sometimes hear voices out of the education system saying that it's not their responsibility to socialize children, it should be done in the home. It's not true. Part of education is really, it's not only about imparting knowledge, yes, but also developing the human being in its broadest context in terms of socially, emotionally. And this takes me to the whole notion of emotional intelligence, because again, these things are embedded in your life skills education, skills to help people to better identify their emotions and manage their emotions and express their emotions. So if I'm angry, I tell you, for example, if you go out there and you ask a Jamaican how you feel, they tell you, I feel away. That's not a feeling. We don't socialize our children, and therefore as adults, we're not equipped with the skills to identify our emotions. So we're not going to say, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling disappointed. Yeah, so we don't know how to adequately express our emotions. Well, firstly, we don't know how to identify them, and we don't have a vocabulary to express our emotions, and so we have difficulty expressing our emotions. And that's why a lot of time we resort to using bad words. Bad words are often used in the context where people are emotionally charged and they're not equipped with the language to express their emotions. They say, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm disappointed, yes? And so what you do is use bad words. Not all the time, but in many instances. So it's the life skill training, it's the emotional intelligence, it's how we relate to each other when we're having conflicts and disappointments and so on. And this is at all levels, not only just poor people but at all levels. I mean, even highly educated people just are not adequately equipped with these skills.
So how do we apply conflict resolution skills then to this, to stem the problem?
Well, it's really, identifying where situations in which you do have a problem, and you express how you feel about the situation rather than attacking the person, rather than using the you message. And what you do is focus on the problems and really seek to resolve the problem.
So should this be taught in schools?
Absolutely, it has to. We gloss over them in the curriculum, but we need to be taught better and taught over time so that people have these skills. It takes a village to raise the child, which is not only the family but the school and all institutions.
Yes. I was about to say many people who perpetrate these acts of violence are members of the security forces, people who have access to weapons. So should they also be learning these conflict resolution skills?
But absolutely, all of us, because members of the security forces, teachers, doctors, media people, we're all coming out of this dysfunctional society, and we all have these dysfunctional skills. So we all need to be taught these, right? But it's harder to teach an old dog new tricks, So, once people have passed through the system and they have developed these inappropriate behavior and skills and so on, it's hard to undo it. And that is why, again, we have to start very early. Early intervention in the home, first 1,000 days in kindergarten, prep school, at all levels of the education system, so that these skills are reinforced and they become embedded and they become a way of life.
It becomes a way of life.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Wendel Abel, I'm going to ask you now, who are you? Where are you from?
Well, I wasn't prepared for this, but I'm professor of mental health at the University of the West Indies. I'm a psychiatrist, which means I'm a doctor who specializes in mental health. Was born in Manchester, so I'm a country boy, yes, from a town in Manchester called Walderston, which is en route to Spalding's, and they would be proud for me to mention Walderston. One of 6 children from my parents, Mother died when I was 6 years of age, right? Went to Wolmer's Boys School. In terms of my passion, I like my chosen profession, and if you were to ask me if I would, you know, that's a very interesting question. I suppose from an early age I always looked out for persons who were the underdogs, so to speak, or persons who were marginalized. And I always felt over the years that people with mental illness were marginalized in the society and underserved. Yes? And so from an early age in from an early stage in medical school, I knew I wanted to do psychiatry and to be involved in mental health. And it kind of has given me the opportunity to do some of the things that I really wanted to do and that I've really enjoyed, working with the homeless population, especially when I was in Montego Bay and in St. Anne working. I've had the opportunity to establish what we call community residential facilities, because I was always concerned about the mentally ill. Many persons with mental illness. Well, firstly, let me say that mental illness is a chronic, a lifelong illness. And a lot of persons with mental illness need supportive care. And for one reason or the other, you may find that their family members cannot provide that support. They may be burnt out, or family members might have migrated, family members are too old. And so we have to provide levels of care in the community, right? Prior to this, what would happen is that majority of persons who are mentally ill would be sent to a mental hospital and they would be locked away for life. And that is the way we treat the mentally ill has moved beyond that, yes? Fortunately, and thank God, we've had new drugs available that allow us to treat people in the community. So the majority of mentally ill persons today actually live, and many of them work in the community, go to school in the community. And so many of them do need to live in the community. But as I said before, for one reason or the other, the families can't provide that supervised care. And so one of the things that I've been able to do over the years is to start these residential facility or group homes, and started it about 23 years ago. And I must say I'm seeing an expansion. Other people are coming into the whole market, and they're establishing group homes, and that is very exciting. It's good to see that you've actually started something and you see it expanding in the society, which gives a lot of persons with mental illness therefore that opportunity to live, work, and exist in the community rather than being locked away for life. And yes, another part of what I've been able to do over the years is also to start day treatment programs in the community, yes? I have one at 163 Old Hope Road, and it's called Ferdy's House. And what happens if you have a mentally ill family member or you have mental illness, you can come to that day program, you learn life skills, different activities, and so on. You return home in the evening. But it gives you a space to interact with people, to socialize, develop skills, and just to exist as a human being in society.
Yes. And as you reflect on yourself,
yes,
what do you hope will define you?
I think what I hope would define me is that I would have, as somebody who has benefited from this country and who has had the privilege of going through the educational system, high school, university, free of cost, although they said there's nothing that is free, but it was free, you didn't have to pay for it. And I've been granted an opportunity to serve in this country, that I've always recognized that the work you do is the rent you pay for the room you occupy on earth. And in serving this country, I hope I would have paid my rent, and for that privilege to have lived and grown up in this wonderful place called Jamaica.
Thank you. What a note to end on. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Interface. Our guest, as you see, is Professor of Psychiatry, Dr. Wendel Abel. I'm Sasha Lee Hamilton. Thank you for joining Interface. See you next week.